Welcome, everyone. I'm Ken Reel, CEO of the Cape Ann Chamber of Commerce, and we are thrilled to have you here for our third Cape Ann Innovators Collaborative. Our goal is that this forum becomes a part of the intricate and amazing fabric of our community and helps to inspire us towards new economic growth. Today's topic is the blue economy, and we are thrilled to have Mike Goodman here of the UMass Dartmouth Public Policy Center and leader of Blue Economy Initiatives on the South Coast. He's here with us this evening as our keynote speaker. Our session features several local leaders, including our moderator, Kahl, Extension Assistant Professor, Sustainable Fisheries, Coastal Resilience at UMass Amherst, and new leader of the Gloucester Marine Station. As you will hear, this topic is not new to Gloucester. What is new, and we hope that you become excited about and ultimately engaged in, is what Mike will be talking about tonight, which is what's going on recently around us in the blue economy, and even more important to us, recent initiatives just south of us on the South Shore and Rhode Island, and things for us to consider here on the North Shore. With that, I would like to turn this over to Kahl, who'll be moderating this evening. Bruce is here. Where's Bruce? Is Bruce Tarr in the room? Senator Tarr. You know what? Would you like to say a couple of words to help us open this event? You are just in time.
Let's see, where did that come from? I can't.
Thank you. Hi, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Ken, and good evening. And I heard it over there, and I'm going to be back to find out who said that. But, you know, a few is always in the eyes of the beholder, or the ears of the beholder. But I just want to say thanks to Ken and for all of the innovators that are here, and to Katie for actually spearheading this effort, because the discussion that's going to happen tonight is critical not only to the future of Gloucester and Cape Ann, but also in many ways critical to the future of coastal communities and our state's economy. And we're here at a very interesting time in the history of the marine economy, which we know historically has delivered a lot of employment, a lot of economic opportunity, and a lot of ways by which our standard of living has flourished up until now. And now we're in a time of, in many ways, transition. And it's a transition where we need to remember how we got here and also think about how we're going to be good stewards of the economic base that we have been given. And so by that I mean, obviously, we need to continue to harvest seafood products from the ocean. We also need to understand, as we see some of the diminished volumes of that harvest, we need to focus on value-added and derivative uses like things we can find in pharmaceuticals and in medical uses, as well as a food product. And we certainly have learned over the last number of years from our friends in Iceland the kind of additional products that can be garnered from fish products that are used or not used and actually discarded after the flesh of the fish is used and marketed. So we have a long way to go on that front. But the very exciting thing about the time that we're in is that we're also opening up new fronts in the ways that we can use our marine resources as good stewards of the environment, but also as folks who want to capture economic opportunity. You need to look no further than the most recent energy bill that was passed by the legislature that Representative Ferrante and I worked on, where Massachusetts is putting a major stake in the ground to harvest offshore wind energy in a way that is harmonious with our traditional industries like fishing, but that also makes us a leader in this country in terms of being able to get a clean, renewable energy resource, but that also creates an economic opportunity. Now, a lot of folks have considered that that economic opportunity will only be in southeastern Massachusetts. I would argue to you that that need not be the case, and we have already been making the argument, as we can see when we look up at Gloucester Engineering, and at that site, we're very good at handling blades and material that are used in the making of offshore wind. There is no reason why the North Shore can't as well be a part of that movement. And then you look at the issue with regard to scientific research, and how proud are all of we of what's happening at the Gloucester Marine Genomics Institute, a new frontier opened up by people locally that want to push us into a new area of endeavor that will not only create a scientific resource and a workforce resource, but will also influence the way that we manage our fisheries so that those decisions are made in an intelligent, sustainable, and responsible way. So as we look at the panoply of the things that are in front of us, we have a lot to look forward to. We certainly have to continue to advance the fisheries that have made us prosperous and have made us storied in the history of this world. But we also have the opportunity to write some new history together. And I trust that's what we're going to hear about a lot tonight. And actually, if you look at the panel, the things that I just described are represented in all of our panelists who each hold some insight into those areas and more. So it's a very good night for this discussion. It's a very good time for this discussion. And I can tell you that the legislative delegation is committed to advancing the things that will be discussed tonight. But we will not do it alone. We will do it as representatives of all of you, because this is a representative democracy, and we all have to be in this together. I hope that was few enough words for some. I hope it was enough for others, and I appreciate the opportunity to share them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, Senator Tarr. Thank you, Representative Ferrante, for being here. Members of the mayors, Sal's here, Jim's here, Paul Lundberg's here. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is a great turnout to have this discussion. So our goal tonight is to start a conversation with some new information in hand, building on lots of work that we've done in the past, to talk about what economic opportunities, blue economy opportunities look like on the North Shore. And we're defining blue economy as a sustainable marine economy that builds on the foundation of traditional marine and coastal assets and generates meaningful economic returns and job opportunities, all while helping to ensure the sustainable use and stewardship of the region's precious coastal and ocean resources. So as Senator Tarr said, this is about building upon what we're good at. What are the opportunities on the North Shore? Where do we want to get to? What do we know? What don't we know? What does the path toward that endpoint look like? So this is an exciting conversation. And in a few moments, we're going to hear from Mike Goodman, Professor of Public Policy and Executive Director of the Public Policy Center at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. He's going to provide us with an overview of his 2017 assessment of the Massachusetts marine economy. And then we'll turn it over to our panel, where we'll have an exciting, creative discussion about opportunities that lie ahead on the North Shore, and then we will welcome some questions from you all. So without further ado, Mike Goodman. Mike is a 3-time past president of the New England Economic Partnership. He currently serves as the co-editor of Mass Benchmarks, the Journal of the Massachusetts Economy, published by the UMass Donahue Institute in cooperation with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Thank you to the Cape Ann Innovators Collaborative, Senator Tarr, distinguished guests. Always a pleasure to be here in Gloucester and in the North Shore. I'm going to briefly, in an effort to set the table for that exciting conversation Katie wants to tee up, by sharing with you some of the results of work we've been doing at UMass Dartmouth in support of the state's efforts to promote the maritime, or as it's come to be known, blue economy. As Katie mentioned, a couple of years ago, my colleagues and I at UMass Dartmouth worked with that Seaport Economic Council to produce a rather comprehensive analysis of where things stand in all the major sectors of that blue economy. And in recent years, since then, we've been looking very hard at opportunities in offshore wind. And I would agree with the Senator that I think those opportunities are not going to be isolated in southeastern Massachusetts, particularly when it comes to the supply chain, which I think is an extremely promising area of future opportunity. And finally, I'm going to conclude by highlighting some of the lessons that I think can be learned and inform this conversation from the ongoing collaborative that's going on in southeastern Massachusetts, Cape Cod, and into Rhode Island. I think I would be remiss if I didn't start off by saying this is not a new conversation, certainly in this community, this region, or this Commonwealth. If you go all the way back to our founding, and heck, even before the settlers came from Europe and elsewhere, the ocean has been a central part of the New England and the Massachusetts identity from its very founding. If you enter our state house, as many of you know, you see the sacred symbol of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which just so happens to be a cod. That's not an accident, and this is something that, again, has been part of our identity, whether it's a central resource and a central asset in our economy overall, certainly our history, our culture, and our art. And so this is something that I think is not a new development, but certainly something that's experiencing a lot of change as a result of the kind of expanding innovation economy that's driven a lot of the state's growth over the last couple of decades. Katie offered, I think, an excellent overview of what we mean when we say blue or maritime economy in terms of its aspirations and its goals. When we did our report, we were doing, in part, an exercise in scaling. How many jobs? What are the sectors? How have those sectors been changing? How do we compare competitively to our counterparts in other states and in other regions of the country, and importantly, a comprehensive survey of businesses in the maritime economy or blue economy space to identify obstacles to growth and expansion and policy implications that our leaders at the regional level, at the local level, and certainly state and federal, to give them a sense of really what it's going to take to maximize the benefits that we can extract from our wonderful tradition and fantastic marine resources. Here we're talking broadly about marine construction, which historically has not been a giant part of the Massachusetts maritime economy. Here we're talking about things like installations of cables and other sorts of technology on the ocean floor. As the offshore wind industry ramps up, we're expecting to see a significant uptick in activity in this area as they install and maintain those substantial offshore wind development sites and lay the cable that's going to be required to get that electricity from the offshore development location into the electric grid. Of course, here in Gloucester, you're well familiar with living resources, the traditional commercial fishing industry, seafood markets, seafood processing, and all of the allied businesses that are associated remain a big and significant part of both the identity of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, this region, and South Coast Massachusetts, the region I come from, and seafood processing, of course, which, as a couple of folks have mentioned already, is adapting to the new environment, opening up new markets, and tapping into technological opportunities to extract more value from the resource and more value economically out in the marketplace. Minerals or offshore is a national industry. We don't do much with that. There is some excavation of sand. Here we're using a very similar, identical in fact, definition as our colleagues at the National Ocean Economic Program do in Washington and in California. We did that in order to be able to compare where Massachusetts stands to other states. Of course, boat building and repair and related port services remain a central competitive element within the maritime or blue economy. Certainly our neighbors in Rhode Island as well have experienced some growth in that area. It's certainly a southern New England tradition and a continued area of strength. Our largest sector in terms of sheer employment and economic activity is the tourism and recreation sector, which if we look at the variety of different segments, whether it's boat dealers, marinas, sporting goods retailers, hotels, restaurants, we went through a very painstaking process of inventorying all of the firms in Massachusetts in these spaces that are located in coastally adjacent zip codes along the water and along the coastal waterways of the state. And then we painstakingly extracted those that weren't really trading on their location vis-a-vis the ocean or the coastline, and validated that by calling hundreds of them to confirm that the reason that they were in the locations they were in was because of their proximity to the ocean. This is a big deal. And again, I think certainly a big part of the story of the Massachusetts maritime and blue economy. And then more broadly and nationally, this is not such a big deal, which is why the national definition lumps it in with transportation, is marine science and technology. Certainly down on my campus, UMass Dartmouth, we're We're home to the School of Marine Science and Technology, which is working in a number of different areas that I think are relevant to existing traditional industries, whether we're talking about stock assessments or deep work into the ocean modeling, climate change modeling, and working with our colleagues at UMass Amherst who have great strengths in those areas. That's something that your public university and a lot of the leading research institutions in southern New England are focused on. And if you take a look at this network of research institutions, particularly along the southeastern coast of the state and into Rhode Island and along the Cape Cod to the islands, whether you're talking about UMass Dartmouth, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the University of Rhode Island, or the Naval Underwater Warfare Center and the naval research activities that are going on in Rhode Island. We're really at the center of science and research and economically relevant technology in the marine space in North America and arguably the world. I'm excited to learn more about what's happening here on the North Shore, and I do know that there are a number of folks on the panel who can speak directly to the opportunities that are present in that space here. It's a really big deal economically. So the tale of the tape here is that we're talking about over 5,500 business locations across the state that I think we can tie directly to the maritime economy as I've just defined it. Over 90,000 folks rely on income that's generated by the maritime industry. This doesn't even include all the spin-off or so-called multiplier effects. This is direct employment. They're earning over $3 billion a year in wages, paying correspondingly significant amounts of tax to the state, supporting services, and contribute in a significant way, punching well above its weight, contributing about $6.4 billion in total economic activity to the overall Massachusetts economy or gross state product. So when we did this work for the state, the Seaport Economic Council and the Baker-Polito administration wanted to use some of this information to understand where there were opportunities, what the trajectory of some of these sectors were, and where there were opportunities for prudent state and federal investments to take some of these sectors to the next level and to grow the impact of this larger maritime or blue economy industry here in Massachusetts to the benefit of our regions. One of the things I thought was, and I would refer you to the larger report for all of the gory details at the sectoral level, but I thought one of the things I wanted to share with you this evening was something that surprised me quite a bit. As you might recall, about 8 or 9 years ago, we had a bit of a recession, right, in 2008 when the global economy sort of crashed, and we certainly were not spared the most difficult elements of that experience here in Massachusetts. But when we look at the trajectory of the maritime economy during a period that includes the most significant economic downturn, and I think, I'm looking around the room, I don't think any of us lived through the Great Depression. I think in our lifetimes, you can see that it really didn't put a dent in overall employment, establishments, wage trajectory, or economic activity, which I think speaks to the resilience and the strength of this larger blue economy here in Massachusetts. Clearly, the trajectory of the individual components or the sectors has not all been positive or all been ideal, but overall, it's been a stalwart, central part of our economy, and I think something that through this counter-cyclical behavior is worth really paying close attention to, because a lot of our other industries rise and fall with the business cycle. This seems to be something that's been hanging in there, even despite some of the most difficult economic conditions, that certainly in my lifetime. One of the higher value-added elements of the report, in my opinion, while it's important to know how big and significant the sector is, really what we were looking to do was to tease out policy implications that our state and local officials in particular could use to drive investment decisions. We went out and we found over 735 businesses that we talked to at some length, interviewed them, distributed evenly or in a balanced proportional way across the sectors. We screened them to make sure that they considered their firm part of this maritime economy. Many of them dropped out when they said they didn't. Not every restaurant in a coastal zip code, for example, is a maritime economy business. The vast majority of them, over 90%, came of age and were founded and are headquartered here in Massachusetts. 75% have been started in the last 10 years. So this is a dynamic industry. 2/3 are smaller businesses, which I think reflects the larger reality in the economy overall. Small businesses are driving employment growth and have been for generations. And these are solid full-time jobs, unlike some sectors of our economy where part-time jobs are the order of the day. So that, I think, gives you a sense that we did a good job of capturing the range of different sectors and perspectives and worked really hard to get the right people on the phone to answer these questions. There's a whole lot of insight in the report that I can direct you to if you're interested in, but one of the things that was really of interest to the Commonwealth was understanding what the priorities the leaders in this business community were assigning to a variety of different challenges that they face to growth. And at the top of that list, and this is something that's not unique to this sector, was concern about workforce, concern about where the next generation of marine tradespersons were coming from, where the next generation of STEM workers that might staff some of these marine science and technology sectors were coming from. And I think that's an area that I think has already started to get more attention from the Commonwealth through the grants that are issued to the Seaport Economic Council, the workforce development programs that are run by the state and the region, and a variety of other areas. There's a host of different ways of cutting this data. When you ask them to assign how important an issue it is, the blue there combines 4 and 5, the ratings that reflect the highest level of importance. So workforce and labor supply, I think, are central competitiveness issues, suggesting that if we're concerned about job opportunities and job growth, I think one of the challenges we're going to have is filling those jobs because we have a lot of retirements across the sectors. Consistently, the average age of the workforce is getting closer to the time when at least some of us aspire to retire. Those retirements are happening, and I think we really need to build the pipeline of the next generation of workers if we're going to be able to fuel and sustain the growth that we have, let alone take it to the next level. We also wanted to know more qualitatively, with an open-ended question, what they considered the greatest strength of Massachusetts was when it came to their blue economy or maritime economy business. And as you can see, each of these words is sized based on the frequency of the response. So location, coastal, people, quality, ocean. This is mirrored by our in-depth interviews that we did with key leaders in each of these sectors, where we heard repeatedly that proximity to the ocean, the stewardship of the resource, and the available talent was really what made Massachusetts a distinctive location in this area. These are the same kinds of things we hear from innovation economy businesses when we talk to them, whether it's in the biotechnology industry, the information technology industry, or other so-called new economy innovation sectors. And I think it's very interesting and very revealing that we have a lot of common challenges in these areas. So what we delivered, among other things, to the Seaport Economic Council was a list of policy implications, and this data and these implications are being used to help craft programs that are designed to help regional and local communities sustain a competitive position in this growing sector. This involves helping smaller sectors get organized and form industry associations, make investments that are long overdue in port infrastructure, including dredging to take advantage of opportunities in port services, traditional industries, and export sectors, developing and expanding specialized training programs to deal directly with this workforce challenge, preserve and protect our ocean and coastal resources to ensure that that access that we've come to rely on could remain viable into the foreseeable future, feed the pipeline of new technology and innovation by advocating and actually attracting more federal research funding, which is an essential element in the lifeblood of this marine tech industry. And ultimately, I'm sure this will come as no surprise to the business people in the room, they really don't like taxes and regulations. I want to speak a little bit to the issue raised by Senator Tarr earlier, because I think it's a very important one. We've got something going on off of Buzzards Bay in between New Bedford and Martha's Vineyard that no doubt you've heard about, and that is the emergent offshore wind industry. The state is in the process of finalizing a contract with Vineyard Wind to install 800 megawatts, substantial, the largest installation in the United States to date. And I think there are a lot of opportunities there. It's been slow going. I'm from New Bedford, and so I think I can identify with some of the concerns that those in the the living resources and traditional industries have had, and I think we're moving slow for that very reason. But one of the most exciting opportunities has to do with all of the different tentacles that this offshore wind industry touches in the Massachusetts and the maritime economy, and particularly the supply chain. So our marine scientists are helping to do the surveying to assess the impact that these developments might have on the local fishery and the regional fishery. People actually do come to the area to see the development as it's going up, and there's experience from other parts of the country that suggests that wind turbines can be in and of themselves tourist attractions. The amount of manpower, person power, that's going to be required to get these components from the shore, they're likely to be staged in the port of New Bedford, to the site, because it's the physical, is closest. They're going to need all kinds of boats, and the Jones Act requires that they be American boats. So there will be demand for new ships that these developers will be purchasing. Water transportation in a related way, marine technology and marine construction are about to be very rapidly growing industries. Going forward, the state has another 800 megawatts of energy to procure, and I think there's every indication that it's going to go to the next level because, to the surprise of many, the price that these offshore wind developers bid on the electricity they'll generate was pretty much competitive with the price we're paying today. And so this is not Cape Wind. This is a brand new technology that I think is poised to provide us with green, clean energy and potentially a toehold in a new industry. These suppliers, whether they're making turbines, whether they're making blades or any of the other components, are going to have to be somewhere in the United States, almost certainly somewhere in the Northeast United States. We don't have a lot of available industrial land on ports, and so I think our port cities are going to have opportunities in this area, and certainly there are advanced manufacturing opportunities that flow from that in the event that we begin to be a location not just where this stuff is developed, but where the components are made. And I think the economic impacts there are rather substantial. We actually did the assessment for the state of the workforce implications, which are substantial, and the likely economic impacts of the development, which are even more substantial. I think there's an opportunity for this region, for the state there. Clearly, we have to make sure that it's not going to displace existing uses, and that's a legitimate concern, but I think with that caveat in mind, it's an exciting opportunity for both southeastern Massachusetts, the North Shore, and Cape Ann. I want to conclude by highlighting a couple of lessons that we're learning down in southeastern Massachusetts. Now, I've been there for about 10 years, and I can tell you we don't always play nicely with one another from community to community. I'm sure you know nothing about that here. But we've just recently developed a consortium of communities that don't normally play well together. New Bedford, Fall River, Barnstable, and even some folks across the state line in Providence, and have put together a proposal with our regional planning agency to take a look at this blue economy over the next 3 years in a planning exercise designed to build a strategy for the South Coast, for Cape Cod, and even a cross-border region that includes our neighbors in Connecticut. This is a long time in the works, certainly an effort that's been led by our Chancellor, Robert Johnson, and I think there's a lot of promise. The federal government has put $600,000 on the table to help make this happen, in part because they recognize the opportunity to get these communities and these regions and even these states to collaborate with one another is rare. And so I think there are some lessons that can be learned there, that there's power in numbers, and that ultimately, while I think we always need to be focused on our local interests, the action economically and the opportunity for economic development is ultimately at the regional level. Planning is an essential part. I think you don't want to just plan to plan. You want to plan with a purpose, a little bit closer to, not quite as far away as UMass Dartmouth. The Metro Quincy area in the South Shore, on a somewhat unrelated topic, is also planning a strategy to deal with the unique conditions they're experiencing in Norfolk County in the immediate Quincy area. So where we're seeing progress regionally outside of the immediate greater Boston area in Massachusetts, we're seeing cross-municipal and regional collaborations focused on concrete goals and measurable economic development outcomes. And so if there's a lesson to be learned from our experience, I think that's one major lesson. The other, I think, is that all these regions of the state, and I've been studying the Massachusetts economy for a couple of decades now, have their own unique strengths, and I think we need to leverage those strengths. I come here not as an expert on the South Shore maritime economy, but rather as someone who's been thinking about it from a more 30,000-foot level at the state and has been sort of in the weeds in southeastern Massachusetts trying to work to pull together a collaborative effort to take our blue economy down there to the next level. I think we've had some success. This is not a new phenomenon here on the North Shore. You've got a lot of powerful assets. You've got significant presence in almost all the major fields, if not all the major fields. You've got a highly skilled workforce, which for generations has been making it happen in these areas. You're pretty well served, as far as I can tell, by regional economic development and workforce development agencies. You've got public and private higher educational institutions at the table, and here I want to tip my cap to Katie for pulling us all together. That's not always an easy thing to do. But I don't see, and maybe I missed something, a comprehensive regional strategy. I've seen some wonderful and insightful reports at the local level. Certainly the Economic Development Council and the Workforce Board have done some good stuff, but I haven't seen yet an opportunity to connect the dots to identify where you want to be and how you're going to get there. I'm hoping that the conversation that's just about to begin can start that conversation, and with that, I think there is some time to take a couple of questions on the work, but I look forward to engaging in the conversation and helping to this region learn from the lessons, and some of them positive, some of them not so positive, that have emerged from our work to date. But with that, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'll just go ahead and introduce our panel now. You've got their bios on the table, but many of you know these folks. Vito Giacalone, he's the president of the Gloucester Fishing Community Preservation Fund, which was a nonprofit fund founded in 2007 with a mission to preserve and promote awareness of Gloucester's fisheries. He's a founding board member for the Northeast Seafood Coalition and has served as their policy advisor since its inception. He's owner of the Fisherman's Wharf property in Gloucester Harbor, where 3 of his sons own and manage a seafood offloading, display auction, and distribution business. Thank you for joining us, Vito. Laura Swanson is the executive director of the Enterprise Center at Salem State University, and she's also the interim director of the North Shore Alliance for Economic Development. The Enterprise Center offers a cross-section of business programs to support entrepreneurs as well as small and medium-sized businesses that are growing on the North Shore. The Alliance is a regional convener and catalyst on the North Shore that supports economic development initiatives for 30 communities through collaboration, advocacy, and regional communication. She was a member of the Salem City Council, serving as counselor at large, as well as commissioner for Salem Parks and Recreation Commission. She currently serves on the board of directors for Sail Salem. Welcome, Laura. And Rick Upton, he is the founder of Gloucester Innovation, a Cape Ann-based firm focused on promoting the growth of businesses involved in AI, data analytics, mobility, ocean sensing, and autonomy. Rick holds a position as entrepreneur in residence at the Engel Center for Entrepreneurship with Endicott College. So thank you, Rick. All right, welcome panel. Thank you for bringing, Thank you for bringing your perspectives, your creative and thoughtful thinking and enthusiasm to the next 15, 20 minutes. So we've set our goal tonight here. Mike just teed up some interesting conversation, laid some new information on the table. As he pointed out, blue economy initiatives can be many things. Just to try to make this a little more concrete, a couple of good examples here in Gloucester. One is Neptune's Harvest. Anne Malloy couldn't be with us tonight, unfortunately, but her company, as many of you might know, is an offshoot of Ocean Crest Seafood. They found a way to use fish byproduct, gurry, the guts and the bones from the fish, to create an organic fertilizer product. This is a globally successful product. They employ about 40 people, so they created a new revenue stream from something that used to be thrown away, and they employ more people, and it's sustainable. Great example. Another example is Proteus Industries. You may or may not know them. Steve Kellerer is the founder here out of Gloucester, and what they've been able to do is extract fish protein, again, from fish byproduct to then improve moisture content and nutrient for packaged fish. Again, creating a new revenue stream, more jobs out of something that may have otherwise not been used. So those are two examples from the living resources section of what Mike described, but those are just two. We want GMGI is another great example. You might say Wicked Tuna is another great example. They've created media and tourism and recreation out of catching tuna, right? So there's a lot of good examples, around here already. And we want to understand what that range of opportunity looks like across those sectors. So, Rick, help us make this tangible and describe an idea that you've proposed recently. I'll give you my mic, okay, or that one. Okay, an idea that you've proposed recently with partners. Talk about that.
Thank you, Katie. And great to see so many familiar faces here, and some of you have shared this journey I've been on for the last 3+ years when I shifted my center of gravity from Cambridge to the North Shore here. But what Katie's alluding to is a proposal that we put in about 4 months ago to the Seaport Economic Council in response to what they refer to as their grand challenge. And what they're trying to do is stimulate or catalyze interest in bringing the latest technology, in particular Internet of Things technology, which may or may not mean much to many people in the room, but this is when every device in this room and every one of us is going to be connected at some point in our lives by a communication network and be doing a lot of interesting things. The Seaport Council was trying to take that technology and find a way to insinuate it into the traditional marine economy, maritime economy, and see if we can get some benefit out of that. What we ended up doing, and I want to acknowledge significant help here on the part of Tom Balfe as well, who's sitting at the table right over here, who's a partner with us in this entire activity. But what we ended up doing was teaming up with the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association, the executive committee, and a number of their members, and saying, what if we could take those traps that you all put out there in the ocean and are working with day in, day out, and what if we put sensors on them to make them smart platforms for gathering ocean data at scale? At scale means, just to give you a couple of quick anecdotes here, but there are over 300,000 permitted traps that exist in the state of Massachusetts. In Maine, it's 10 times that amount. If I could take a fraction of those, and a not trivial fraction, but if I could take a fraction of those, find a way to integrate a sensor into that, measure some key ocean parameters in where those traps are laid, and they're constantly being moved around and redeployed and so forth, but create an aggregate picture of what ocean conditions look like from a acidity point of view, temperature point of view, and you can imagine some of the other things. What kind of data could we really get out of that, that could influence, number one, the lobstermen themselves and make their efforts more productive, and make the harvest that they've got more productive? And then what could that data be used for by other people, whether it's in aquaculture or many other industries which you can imagine? So we have a proposal to basically put together a few hundred of these sensor traps in a pilot effort initially, hopefully funded by the Seaport Council, in concert with one of the nation's leading companies in deploying a network that none of you have ever heard of, which is a company called Sigfox, which is going to be part of a next-generation Internet of Things communication network capability. And we're going to allow that network to gather data from these ocean sensors on a daily basis, bring it back to a marine data cloud, and start generating analytic products that will be useful to the lobstermen, to aquaculture people down the road, to many others, to the standard fisheries that the multiple fisheries we have, and many, many, many others. So we're pretty excited about the fact that we were able to bring together this high-tech stuff, which is my background, having worked in Cambridge and helped to build 10 companies over my career in the high-tech arena, with traditional lobstermen and the work that they do, leveraging exactly what they do in a non-interfering basis with what they do. We just make their traps a part of a new network to gather data that no one had ever thought of before. No effort on their part in any significant way to maintain or operate this network. We'll do it, but all of us will benefit from that particular capability. So this is exciting for us to be able to do something like that, and as far as we know, it's the first of its kind type of effort anywhere. So again, Massachusetts in the lead. Thank you very much.
It's exciting. It's exciting. So, Vito, do you see, I mean, there are obvious, so I work at a marine station, so I'm thinking about water chemistry, and I'm thinking about the way fish patterns are going to move over time, and I'm wondering what we can do with this amazing cloud of data. But from a practical on-the-ground standpoint, you've got a microphone right there. What do you think about on the waterfront, besides just fisheries? What's your response to that idea?
Well, I think it's intriguing to be collecting data incidental to the everyday work that you're doing. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. We say that all the time. We're always working with marine scientists to say we need more granular data. The data we use right now to govern or to form the basis for stock assessments is too coarse. But we have all these samples going on a daily basis that people are earning a living doing something else doing. So to me, that's a byproduct in a way of fishing. So it's intriguing to see that. I think the world is changing, and it's be good to be monitoring it using samplers that are out there every day. So I don't know what the economic connection would be yet, but I think where it's incidental, why not? Especially if there are businesses locally that are going to form around collecting and disseminating that data.
And then, Laura, North Shore wide, you work with a whole different group of businesses. Did any bells go off when Rick was talking about that? Are you thinking about how that could be used?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about that there's a lot of new companies that can be generated from that in terms of what the data delivers. I also think that there's a large number of coastal communities that north of Boston that could benefit from the work that's happening here. I mean, one of the things that is sort of exciting about talking about the blue economy in terms of an industry cluster is it gives you an opportunity to look at it from a much broader perspective, that maybe some of the things that are happening in Gloucester could be shared with Salem, could be shared with Nahant, all of the coastal communities that are there. And so, one of the key things in order to start that conversation is to convene people of a cross-section, right? So that when we talk about the blue economy, it's interesting, I'm just curious, after the definition that was presented about blue economy, just by a show of hand, how many people sort of identify themselves as maybe a participant in the blue economy or maybe a possibility of being in the blue economy? Okay, great. Right, so that's, and probably a lot of different sections in terms of tourism, and I'm sure all of the other pieces. And what I think we should be looking at when we explore this is, one, how can we support the existing businesses that are there? What are the opportunities for growth within those existing businesses? What are the newer emerging industries that can come up, and what do they need? But also to sort of break it down a little bit more, actually to expand it in terms of not looking at it in just that particular silo, but let's talk about the needs in terms of the workforce, the skills that's going to be necessary. Let's talk about the transportation. How are we getting people to and from this North Shore region? What about the affordable housing component of that? Where are people going to live? And depending on where they live, that's going to really have a huge impact in terms of transportation. So by talking about all of these different opportunities that come from the ocean, if you create this umbrella of the blue economy, what it does is it allows us to look at all of those pieces, so that what we can hopefully do, that if there are some emerging industries and some companies that are starting, we know ahead of time what their workforce is going to need, so we can start the conversation sooner. There's also a number of resources available on the North Shore that can help businesses, whether you're in the fishing industry, the technology industry, all of those kinds of things, such as North Shore Innovators, there's the North Shore Technology Council, there's the Enterprise Center, there is Rick's group, right? I mean, there's so many host of things, but what we want to try to do is to create a framework that there's a piece of the pie for everybody that's in there, but by coming together, you can speak with a larger voice. You can have a greater impact, and we're not talking about those issues just specifically in silos. And then hopefully what you learn in Gloucester can be shared with the rest of the region, or something that may be taking place someplace else can be shared. So, I think looking at it from that perspective, I think puts us head and shoulders above most. And I think the North Shore is very unique in the fact that it has I would say that there is a strong willingness for collaboration and partnership amongst communities. That's what we've seen, that's what we've witnessed, and businesses are very much interested in terms of trying to stay here. But they can't stay here if they don't have the workforce. They can't stay here if they don't have the transportation. They can't stay here if there is something like affordable housing or policies that are impacting how that's done. So if we take the data that someone like Rick is doing, it can also impact just the businesses, not just the businesses that are growing, but in terms of the policymakers. It gives them the information they need that if it happens to happen at that level, then they're part of the conversation as well.
Okay. So, so then, Mike, in your experience, how do the regional decision makers in the room begin to think about what a path looks like? I'm listening to all the things Laura's saying, and I'm thinking, okay, in one community, all the different people that would have to be around the table playing from the same playbook, and everyone agreeing on where do we want to be? Okay, what's the strategy to get there? And what are all the pieces we have to try and put our arms around? So from a regional perspective, Mike, have you, and not to put you on the spot, but can you kind of walk us down a path maybe of, and it would be different in every region because everyone plays to their own strength. What's happened on the South Shore? What can we think about?
Yeah, so particularly the South Coast, sort of the 195 corridor from Fall River to New Bedford and up to the Rhode Island line and almost to the bridge at Cape Cod, it's been slow going and it hasn't been a straight line. So there's history, and I think there are, the sectors don't always see themselves as part of the same larger industry. We had to overcome a lot of debates, and some of which are still ongoing, about the idea that these things are mutually exclusive or zero sum. That is, if we're doing one thing over here, it's got to come at the expense of that other thing over there. It's taken a lot of energy and research and evidence and talk to get past that, because for understandable reasons, there are a lot of concerns that moving in new directions will continue to make it worse for some of the traditional industries that have been under great pressure, both in the region where I come from and certainly this region. So I think it's building that trust and that dialogue, and then the evidence base on which to build it. I mean, again, getting the two mayors to talk to one another, and most of the time it's not always easy to do. They found common cause here, even if they don't want to necessarily broadcast it always, because they're both looking to do better by their own communities. And so what really started to take it to the next level was some research that was done looking at the definition of the region and realizing that it includes portions of Rhode Island, a significant portion of Rhode Island, which, right, that was news that didn't sit well on either side of the border for quite a while, but it's starting to sink in, and I think we've had some serious economic challenges down on the South Coast and in Rhode Island too, and I think now leaders are starting to take a hard look at how do we build on those strengths and how do we create opportunities that are more diverse so that we can sustain this maritime economy, this traditional way of life, and be part of the new innovation economy. And again, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it and suggest that everybody always gets along or that it's very easy, but when you can find common ground, when you can find common interest and a little bit of external investment, I think we've started to build some momentum. We've got a lot of work to do, but I do think it's promising, and there's some momentum, and I think that can happen with the evidence base, the collaboration, and a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the survey you did, and you were talking about the number of businesses that identified themselves as connected to the marine economy. Thinking about that point, and then I'm thinking about a map that Greg Catamatori actually showed me, and then I found the report that it came from later. Steve Winter from MAPC, actually, are you in the room? Made the graphic, and it was, I think, from a report in 2013, and it showed these are the fisheries-related businesses, these are the marine-related businesses, and I can't remember what the third icon on the map was, but the reach inland was far greater than I guess I would have initially assumed. So when we think about supply chain, everything that we're talking about doesn't have to happen on the coast. This isn't about we're changing the waterfront, right? This is how do we connect the dots? How do we think about what is connected to the marine and coastal system? What is, I mean, Rick's talking about collecting all this data. Where does it get analyzed? Where does, where are the data analytics happening? That doesn't have to happen on the waterfront. So I'm just thinking out loud.
No, absolutely. And one of the lessons we've learned and haven't really worked through is that not all the fish processing needs to happen on the water either. And so, at least in New Bedford, there's a long-term leases and tradition and all of that. But when we look at where the fish processing has been growing in southeastern Massachusetts, it's been growing away from the water in the industrial parks in the region, which I was quite surprised by.
Okay. So maybe, I'm not sure if this is to Rick or Vito or both of you, but how do we think about positioning sustainable blue economy businesses on the North Shore to be more attractive for investment? So I think, I'm thinking about the way you might answer it and the way you might answer it, and
You okay with that, Vito? Okay. I've had the experience and the fortune, a few years back to actually be part of a venture capital firm called General Catalyst in Cambridge. And actually, the most beneficial part of that was to sit in a Monday meeting with the partners every Monday for about a year and a half and listen to people coming in, giving the pitches about the businesses they wanted to start and what the venture capitalists would actually, invest in or not. Most were not invested in, right? But there were some common themes that started to emerge from that. And, location was one of those. And we heard Mike say that, right? It was the number one or the largest, word in that one slide. What they look at is where are you located, and relative to that, it's not just the location, but it's what other companies are like you in that area. Is there a critical mass of energy and companies that are focused on trying to develop a business of that is relevant to the area that you're located in? What access do you have to assets? And we've mentioned this, Laura did, in terms of education, training, and all of that sort of thing. Do you have access to that? So that things start to grow, you're going to be able to find the skilled workers, you're going to be able to find the people to work it. Of course, the third thing for many of the venture capitalists that I know is, what's the return on that investment going to be? Don't give me 2x, don't give me 3x, I'm looking for 5 or 10x over some reasonable period of time on that. So we need scalable businesses too. And it's one of the reasons why, again, I'll point at the one example I gave when I first started talking was, data businesses that are built around a chunk of data have the prospect of growing very, very rapidly. And if you look, I don't have the numbers off the tip of my tongue here, but we were looking at how much data we could acquire from, let's say, just a few hundred sensors over a reasonable period of time, and it was massive. And if I ended up scaling this network out to thousands of sensors in thousands of traps, and still I'm only a portion of those traps that the lobstermen are taking out there, it is ginormous, and those are the sorts of data, chunks that I can build an entire business around and use in multiple ways that could end up feeding interesting information into the biotech industry through companies like GMGI, that Chris has got here, and Andrea and others. It could be feeding it through, the regular fishing industry and making them more productive and so forth. We could understand so many other things and do so much more with that data that we can't even anticipate now. So, I think that what we need to do to make it, things investable here is think scale, make sure we have some things that are going to grow big, make sure we can staff and have the expertise to fuel these companies and be innovative and make whatever those companies are about. And we need to have a critical mass of companies. We need not just one GMGI, but we could use 10 GMGIs in this location over a reasonable period of time doing complementary things, but all in that area. So you have a set of investable properties that people are going to be interested in. So my first cut.
Yes. My role, right, is to talk about fishing. I mean, that's what we have here in the port.
Talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, that's what Gloucester was built on, and I think it's not a well-known fact that there's still an awful lot of fish being harvested and landed in the port. The traditional species like haddock, redfish, pollock. So we are positioned in a way that nowhere, Boston is still a high-volume offloading port. North of that, it's only Gloucester. Portland's very small now in landings, and New Bedford has shrunk quite a bit in landings on groundfish for southeast. So Gloucester is really positioned well if there are byproducts and things that can be extracted from fish processing. Now, we've lost our fish processing capacity in Gloucester, so it's very old school, but we do need to think about that, especially as Mike pointed out, fish processing now with the EPA laws, there's no advantage to be on the waterfront. You can't be dumping stuff back into the water. So it doesn't matter if you're connected to municipal sewer, it doesn't matter if you're on a 5-acre site, you know, west of 5 miles west of the ocean, or if you're on the ocean. It's the same thing. So fish processing is not water dependent. We know that now. And our designated port area in Gloucester, that's another unique thing about Gloucester, and I don't know how this stands out among other North Shore or other designated port areas, but it's a privately owned waterfront, mostly. New Bedford's not. So when we talk about wind and all of the potential capacity for doing some of that big, heavy lifting, to what extent the properties in Gloucester are positioned for that, I don't know. To what extent they'd be competing with municipal properties elsewhere, we don't know. But I think those are the things we need to think about and not fool ourselves heading down a direction that we're poised for that if we're not. You know, and so I think there's a lot of work to do there. And the designated port area properties, fishing is typically cyclical. I don't know anything that isn't, but it's quite volatile, and I think it's important to have what we have in the designated port area is 50% of the property can be used for supporting use. And a supporting use is defined as anything that provides either direct support or financial support to the property. Where they're private properties, if there's a use on the property that meets the guidelines, then it would offer support to the water-dependent use that's on the property because it lowers the need, to put all the burden on that water-dependent property. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for, like Rick's talking about, and as we see what GMGI is doing down there, that, mixing those uses, I think would be cohesive. I think it could work, and it could, improve the basis of some of these property owners that are struggling with the cycles. There's no cycles in property taxes.
Okay. All right. Panel, thank you. We need to open it up to some questions from our audience. I'm sure there are many. But thank you. Another round of applause. So what are you guys thinking? What are the ideas out there? Reactions? Questions?
My name's Tom Lukegood. I'm a Cape Ann resident. And my question is, on those lobster trap devices that you're going to be collecting your data on, how is that data going to get to you? Is it going to be transported from a laptop on the lobster boat from the captain? Or is there a radio signal that will go to a satellite and then come to you?
That's a good question, and a technical one, unfortunately, for most people here. But we are looking, I'll use this. We are looking at, I mentioned this network run by a company called Sigfox. It is referred to as an Internet of Things network, and it will be that network as we deploy this capability that I'm talking about over a period of several years. Will cover the entire coastline of Massachusetts, and will actually allow when those pots or those traps are actually brought up on boat, the data will be communicated from those sensors directly over this network back to a marine data cloud. The lobsterman will not have to do anything specifically to make that data go. These things will be aware when they're brought out of the ocean. They'll activate, they'll transmit the data, the lobsterman will drop them back in, doing their standard thing that they do. So it's a new network that is going to facilitate communication out to about 10 to 15 kilometers coastal waters to bring that data back.
So that information will be sent once it's out of the water. There'll be no radio signals in the water.
Right. Nope, that's correct.
And the reason what generates my question is the groundfish have lateral lines, and a radio signal in the water would affect them. They'd feel that night and day all the time. Sounds like a great thing. That information is going to be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susanna Altenburger, represent Phil Boger and Friends. We've been designing boats out of Gloucester since 1952, which is maybe the oldest venture in the room tonight. I'm not quite that old, but I'm getting to look that way. We've noticed about 15, 16 years ago that the fishing fleet was in deep trouble Not necessarily by how much fish there was, but what kind of fishing fleet they were allowed to run. Vito, for instance, is an old dragger man. He's not in a position to actually pick a 21st century fishing boat if he wanted to. Whether he likes to or not is something else. We have a fleet out here that's about 30, 35 years, 40 years old conceptually, and an industry that's frozen in time for over 25 years due to federal regulation for New England since March 1st, 1994, will simply not be long for this world, tragically. So whatever Vito's doing, he's working his butt off. He's taking a great deal of hit in terms of, personal life and all this. His sons are still talking to him, so it's not all bad, but they're in the same business. We all are ailing under a much bigger issue than sensors or innovation ideas, because when you do this work that we do in the blue economy since 1952, nobody can much tell us, nor can anybody tell Vito how to run this business. We're kind of in it. We don't mind learning, but we have bigger issues than sensors and neural networks and genetic intelligence and artificial intelligence and whatever code. I'm all for it, believe me, but we've got a big structural issue here that we've got a fleet out of sync with any definition of sustainability, not because fishermen are stupid, but they're not allowed to build the fleet they need. And that's something we need to discuss one of these days. And if you need people who call themselves innovators, doing this work for 66 years and still standing, suggests we know roughly what we're talking about. Thank you for your ears.
Thank you, Susan.
Hi, I'm John Duggar. I'm an architect who practices regionally in New England. I see a similar situation here that goes very fundamental, and the lady just spoke really hit it. We operate, whether we're running an industrial business or development business, under guidelines of zoning, which impacts this district that we're in right now very heavily because of the use requirements. What I would like to know is, and I don't know if Bruce is still here, but is anything being done to analyze these antiquated regulations based on the technological milieu that we are in now? We're very often in New England dealing with hundreds of years old regulations that are not responsive to what's actually going on in time. And I don't know where to go with that. I'm not a politician, I'm not an attorney. But that is the fundamental thing that's restricting the explosion that could be happening here.
I hope this is responsive. I own property in the designated port area, so I'm fully aware of it. But it's a, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater thing all the time, right? It's, some folks just want to have complete change and just, it's not working, my property is not doing well, let's rezone everything. And we end up in 4 or 5 year debates of how to tinker with the Chapter 91 designated port area section. So we have what's called a master harbor plan. It does evolve, it does change. I think the most recent one we have is 2014. There have been modifications and improvements to try to get more involved in the contemporary, economy. But it's a struggle. It's glacial speed, and you can't just fix it with zoning. Right. I mean, it's not build it and they will come kind of thing. We need to figure out, where are the opportunities, number one, and how do we customize our communities to be attractive to those opportunities. Identifying them it's one of the reasons I'm here. We're looking for that, to grab something that can be scaled up, that can actually make a difference. And then zoning will change.
Just a very quick, so I'm not aware of any efforts to reform those regulations, but I think this is where a comprehensive regional economic plan that's driven towards goals that are developed by the people who live and work here, right, that then identify priorities, allow you to speak with a loud enough voice that it's difficult to avoid, right? So if revisiting those zoning regulations is something that's important to this region and this community, then I think being able to go and make the case along with your neighbors and other communities that that's something that deserves the attention and some priority. Recent history suggests there's an appetite for that, but I think without that kind of collective effort, The rest of the history suggests that that's nowhere. So I think trying to figure out where you want to be is a long conversation, and I'm sure there are a variety of different opinions, but I think there's no escaping figuring out where you want to get to before you can chart a course there. Now, I'm not a mariner, but I'm going to spend another 3 hours in the car on the way home tonight, and I know that the app in my phone is going to make sure that I get there by the quickest and shortest route. So planning works. Obviously, developing a consensus around where you want to be is hard work, but once you've got that down, then figuring out how to get from where you are to where you've agreed you want to be is not as hard as you think. That first step, though, I think remains to be taken.
Hi there, my name is Dave Bertoni. I'm with the NSDC, and I want to address the idea of the blue economy. And what I think you're talking about is a cluster of companies that form an economy, and there are two types of clusters. There's one called a local cluster, and those are things that are sold locally. It might be like, comes from Michael Porter's work, something like, your nail parlor or the local cinema. Then there are traded clusters, that are traded outside of this particular area. They're way more valuable, they're way more sustainable, they produce a lot more economic value. And what I really appreciated was when Laura was talking about having conversations about other areas, and when Rick was talking about creating a product and a value that was beyond just the use of the local lobsterman. It made me think, in wind generation, if you become the best wind generator, we can move anywhere on any coast to do any development anywhere. Those, in my mind, are the things that we have to be thinking about if you want to make a blue economy. So that would be where I think the discussion has to go, is what is it that we can do locally that is really valuable outside of this area? That wasn't a question.
Thank you, Jim Mascherelli. I just have a question for you, Michael. You mentioned the report that you spoke to is available, but tell us how to get it.
Absolutely. So you can. It's free. So our website is UMassD, D for Dartmouth, .edu/PPC. That's for Public Policy Center. And on the front page, it circles through our most recent reports, and all of the reports are there. The ones on the maritime economy, and offshore wind.
Okay, so the $600,000 that you mentioned, which is a start, it's not a lot of money, right, for this sort of intergalactic regional cooperation and so forth, which will certainly pay for conferences and travel to conferences and things like that. What would be your goal? That's for 1 year?
It's for 3, and we're matching it dollar for dollar, and we're not going to any conference.
No, I didn't mean to be an idiot, but what I was saying is I don't know how that money's going to be spent, but I think it's a great idea to get this kind of regional planning going, as long as it focuses also on the impact locally. It's not just all about policy from above. So my question there is, what would be the markers for, let's say, a year later, after that money's spent or whatever, to put more money into it? What would be the triggers, and what would the money be spent for?
Yeah, no, I mean, we were required by the Economic Development Administration to spell out very clear goals, and those goals are about industry growth. So this is an economic development project, not, hey, I'm an academic, so I like writing essays as much as the next guy, but the task here is helping the region take it to the next level, and the concrete outcomes that the federal government is insisting we try to document include actual growth at the firm level, including job creation. So in the first year, we're going to take a very careful stock of where we have our strengths in the economy. That's going to drive the development of programs that are going to help to cultivate the businesses we do have and build a network across communities and, with a little luck, across borders and even across the the Bourne Bridge, to have these communities working together on an ongoing basis on the kind of issues Laura brought up that are needed to support industry growth. So it's not just new technology and innovation and investment, but we're going to need the warm bodies. And I don't know from here as much as I do down there at this point, but the next generation of folks who are working in the Port of New Bedford, we're having a hard time finding people. On Cape Cod, they don't really have children anymore, so it's kind of hard to know where the people are going to come from, and we're no longer permitted to import people. So we've obviously got to work at this problem on multiple levels. The educational institutions, including but not limited to UMass, K-12, the state U's, the community colleges, the workforce agencies. So we're trying to corral all of those people and get them moving in the right direction. But if we can't move the needle on economic development and opportunity and income growth, then we've failed. And those are the markers that we've laid for ourselves, and that's what we're going to be held accountable to.
So I could go to that site a year from now, your site, and see some there'll be progress reports.
I don't know if we can move the needle in a year, but there certainly will be, and accountability, and you can contact me directly if you can't find it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're about 10 minutes over. I'm going to give the final word to Representative Ferranti.
Thank you. And how about a round of applause for our panelists and for Katie? So I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank, is it Dave? Right here? Yeah. Oh, Dale, I'm sorry. Well, no, what is it? Is it Dave? Yes. Okay. I want to thank Dave because he talked about a concept that's really important. And just to let you know, Dave, I'm a big fan of the whole cluster development theory. I studied under Michael Porter at the business school along with Laura Alfaro, who he's now handed that baton off to. And I think that's what we're seeing here in Gloucester. What we're seeing on Cape Ann is we have a UMass station that's open with lights on, with people, and that makes me happy. We have NOAA, the leading agency when it comes to marine research. We have the Division of Marine Fisheries. We also have the new institute that's about to open, Gloucester Marine Genomics. And what we're seeing is we're starting to put the pieces together that would be a real active cluster. We also have, over at the industrial park and various other properties around town, we have rental rates that are much below the Cambridge value, which gives us that ability to attract business. Senator Tarr was here earlier. I know Councilor Lundberg is here. One of the things that we're working on collectively is we put into the bond bill $1.2 million in the economic development bill in order to upgrade how technology is accessed here on Gloucester, because I think one of the barriers right now to formulating a full cluster here is, do we have the technology to compete with Cambridge in terms of internet capacity, broadband capacity, and access to the cloud? And we have to have that in order to be able to say with a straight face, we're ready to develop a cluster here. And so hey, I didn't see you earlier. Good to see you. And in order to do that, we need to have that. So I'm glad all of you came up tonight. I think we're really lucky to have the panel that we do. I think if you look at GMGI, there are various pieces that we'll put together in terms of research, in terms of an academy that could provide that workforce and help train folks in order to be in those fields, so that what we're really doing is taking people who can take advantage of middle skills jobs and help us close that gap. We're able to do it. And certainly I think a lot of that was touched upon in terms of what we can do. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that all of you are here. You have our commitment to continue to work on these clusters, and not just the marine biotech, but also, as was pointed out, the wind. I think wind's going to play an important part here in energy. I think it can. I think fisheries, and Vito is more knowledgeable than I am in this field, but I will say my father was a fisherman, and Vito and I know that there's We may not ever be able to catch the volumes of fish that Gloucester once did, but there is value in what we can capture and how we market it that we haven't tapped into yet. And I think marine transportation, as was noted in the report, is going to be another big area. Drew Tarr is here from my office, and he and I commute into Boston. There was a point in time where somebody could leave Boston before 5 and get back to Gloucester in an hour and 15 minutes. That no longer exists. And if we can't figure out, the transportation question, certainly that's going to be hindrance, because other than me and Drew, because we have each other to chit-chat with, and we should have our own morning podcast of local news coming out of Cape Ann, because we chat for that amount of time together. Who the heck wants to stay in traffic for 2.5 hours both ways? I mean, we look at now, it used to be that it was about a 2.5-hour commute, and now it's a 5-hour commute. It's astounding that every day we're losing 5 hours of the day just to sitting in traffic. And for everybody who thinks that all of this stuff works, I have the vehicle, the Chevy that has the 4G, whatever it is, right in the car, so the hotspot, and I have the hotspot in the phone, but I can tell you, not all of Route 1 or 93 has access to the hotspots. Haven't tried that whole route to recapture time. So I think it's important that we, work to build a cluster here. We focus and we sort of decide what it is that we want to be and what fits into our matrix here of what can be successful here locally, what our attributes and our assets are that allow us to excel, and two, that we figure out those critical blocks of what are the building blocks, what are the supply chain areas that we can expand into, and how do we vertically and horizontally integrate that so we maximize our potential for jobs. So thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Katie who put this all together.